This section of the gospel comes from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Last week, Pastor Brad picked up at the beginnings of the Sermon on the Mount, and in his zealous attitude to proclaim the gospel, kind of marched right through half of mine too. So if you hear some overlap this morning, it's intentional, I think. But we'll go anyway, because it's a wonderful message. Jesus is talking to his disciples and a group of folks gathered around him on this hillside, and he's talking to them about what it means to be a follower of Jesus in the world at his time, and then we know Scripture is timeless, so Jesus is speaking directly to us today. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in the world today? And in the world today, it's not always easy, but it is about relationships. It's about building and maintaining or fixing or repairing relationships. And in our culture today, it's not always an easy thing, because the predominant message we get in culture today is individualism. It's all about me, what I can gain, what I can do, and it doesn't matter who I run over in the process. You're just an obstacle for me to get through to get to what I want. That's one of the predominant messages of our culture today. Also, autonomy. I live in my own little bubble. What I do is my business, and it doesn't affect anybody else, even if it does. I'm kind of my own bubble floating around, and forget the rest of you. That's one of the messages we get in the world today. And independence. I don't need anybody. I can do this by myself. We're charged with a different message. A message of connectedness. A message of community, a message of dependence on each other, to lean on each other in good times, to lean even harder on each other in bad times or troubled times. And we know it's not all about us, because what we do affects everything else around us. So it's not that autonomy and living in our own bubble, it's community and it's connectedness with other folks. So Jesus says, I didn't come to abolish the law. I came to make the law more clear. So maybe it was something like not avoiding murder or anger, but what does it mean to completely avoid being angry at other people so we're not unintentionally or intentionally harming them? It's not about just the act of adultery. It's how do we get around that temptation to begin with. And it's not about divorce or oaths. It's much bigger than that. It's about restoring relationships. And it starts with how we show God to others. If you weren't aware and you didn't read Pastor Brad's newsletter, it's there now. I won't ask you to read the whole thing, but it's out on the website if you want to take a look at it. We have a new mission statement. We've already rolled it out, and it will continue to be coming at you, but it's revealing God through revolutionary relationships. And that is an active thing. We want folks in our congregation to follow Jesus in a way that reveals God to other people in the community through revolutionary relationships. And it starts with love. Starts with love. I was listening to this particular Robcast. It's called Love and Muchness. I'm not sure that muchness is an actual word. I'm sure it's not. But he used it and it made sense to me. Muchness is the idea that I have love for everybody, but it's not the same for everybody, but I can give out as much of it as I have. And it begins with this idea of imago Dei. This idea that we are all created and made in the image of our God. We're all made in the image of God, and that inherently gives us a connection to love them. So, for example, Rob talks about buckets of love. So I have a bucket of love for God that's pretty big. But I know that God's bucket of love for me is even bigger. Like no bottom to it, bigger. Bigger than I can imagine or comprehend. I have love, a big bucket of love for my wife and my kids. I'm pretty sure their bucket of love is probably just a little bit bigger than mine for them, but we work at it. I have a smaller bucket of love, but a bucket of love nonetheless, for the person that turned right in front of me the other day as I was trying to leave Wendy's. And those buckets of love that we hand out in muchness, as much as we can possibly give out, changes in a very revolutionary way our relationships with other people. See, if we're having an argument or discussion, not argument, in our family, to hand out muchness of love brings that anxiety and stress down in that relationship so we can function. Imagine what could have happened when the person turns right in front of me as we're both exiting at the same time. I could have laid on my horn and waved at him with one finger. I could have, but what relationship would that have built? I can give them the benefit of the doubt, knowing that they are a beloved child of God, as I am, created with purpose, and go, maybe it was a mistake. And maybe as they travel on, they go, wow, I really did something I shouldn't have done there, and I didn't get screamed at. That changes a relationship even if I never get to talk to them. It could have been I laid on the horn and waved at them, and then they go off and they're mad because they made a mistake and they got called out on their mistake. And that's a whole different kind of relationship. I've only been in the state of Ohio for about 3.5 years now, which means a couple of trips to the license branch. In the state of Indiana, we have the BMV as well, and it's not a fun place to go because you sit and you wait and you wait and you wait and then you wait some more. And then finally you get to meet a person face to face and you're done maybe the first time in a couple of minutes and you're on your way. Sometimes you have to, oh, I'm sorry, you don't have this piece of paper, you'll have to come back. That's wonderful news. But imagine what that relationship would be like if you gave them just whatever little bucket of love you had left at that moment, because I'm sure they've had a pretty rotten day with 100 other customers in the same situation as you that have waited for hours. How does that change that relationship? When we're angry and we have a really small bucket of love. Jesus says if you have an argument with your brother and sister, fix it. Fix it, reconcile it before it gets to a point where it's hard to reconcile. Don't commit those small acts of, as we learned last week, murder that doesn't actually kill them, but just it's like death by 1,000 cuts. Let's not do that, Jesus says. Let's set that anger aside. Pour out your bucket of love in whatever that relationship looks like. That's revolutionary revealing of God. Then we have the difficult subject of adultery. Jesus calls it out point blank. It's not just an act, a physical act. It has to do with the custody of your eyes. See, there's seeing someone as a beloved child of God, worthy of dignity and respect with a purpose in life, and looking at someone as an object. Those are two completely different things. We can see someone as a child of God and objectify and look at someone for their appearance or what we think we can gain from them. Jesus says that's the same thing. Adultery is adultery. Whether you commit the physical act or if you just think about it, the way you gaze at someone, lustfully, it's adultery. But that's not building relationship. I have a pretty diverse group of friends on Facebook. I have some very conservative folks, some very, we would say, liberal folks, and all kinds of folks in between. And I'm watching the Super Bowl and the halftime show comes on, and my Facebook is lighting up. On one hand, I have folks who were seeing these very strong-willed women and men out on that stage sharing their gifts of song and dance and exuberance of life with the world. And they were celebrating that. Did you see that? How powerful they were and the dances they did? They shared their gifts with the world to bring a little bit of joy and peace to the world. That was seeing them as beloved children of God. And then there was another group of folks who said, can you believe what they were wearing? That was looking. That was putting them as an object. You see the big difference there? And I'm sharing my little buckets of love or bigger buckets of love with all of them because I want to build those relationships, not shut them off. But there's a difference between seeing and looking. Then we have a very difficult subject of divorce. I don't think there's very many people that come before a congregation, before a judge, and say to themselves, man, I can't wait for the divorce. But we are in human relationships. And sometimes parts of human relationships break to the point where the most loving thing to do is to say enough's enough. It's not a comfortable thing to talk about. It's not a comfortable thing to go through. But our religion sometimes, the Christian faith in general, sometimes has put labels on folks as, oh, they're divorced. Like somehow they're other. As a congregation, as a group of Jesus followers, one of the loving things we can do is say, we love you for exactly the person you are, regardless of what your old relationships might have been, whether they were successful or not successful. Maybe you worked through them, maybe you didn't. But I see you as a beloved child of God, worthy of dignity and respect. Come be a part of this community. We love you. Then Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. What would it look like, church, if you said yes, and every time you said yes, you followed through and you did it? What kind of revolutionary relationship would that be? My wife would be thrilled if every time I said, yes, I'll take out the trash, I actually did it like that day or the next. Even, I think she'd be thrilled with that. But let your yes be yes and your no be no. Not with condition, well, I'll do it if, or I promise, because somehow a promise makes it even better. But let your yes be yes just as it is. If folks could rely on you to follow through with your yeses and your nos, what kind of revolutionary relationships would that build? There we go. And it's all in this centered around seeing each other as the image of God. And whatever amount of love you can have for somebody at any particular moment based on their image of God that you can see reflected back to you. Sometimes it's going to be big buckets of love. Sometimes it's going to be little buckets of love. What would it look like if after you sat in the line at the BMV for 2 hours and you walk up to this person that's standing behind the counter and you can tell they've just had a rough day. People obviously not happy that they've had to wait for 2 hours at a time. What would it look like if you said, wow, thank you for getting through my paperwork so fast. You've got to be the fastest paper worker here. I am so sorry it took 2 hours for us to get to meet. Imagine what that would do for that relationship with you and them, and how that would radiate throughout the day. Revealing God through revolutionary relationships. Seeing people as the image of God and handing out whatever bucket of love you might have for them in as muchness as you can. It'll change things.